Hello, and welcome to Tomversations, a regular conversation with me, your host, Tom Hollingsworth, the networking nerd, about a variety of technology subjects. Today, I'd like to talk about security, and specifically, I'd like to talk about your security team and the fact that they're not exactly the most risk-taking individuals out there. Are you a gambling person? Some of us are. Maybe we play the lottery. Maybe we go to Vegas every once in a while. Maybe we hope that we're going to uncover some hidden treasure when we're playing Pokemon Go. But the truth is that a lot of us are not really aware of the risks that we're taking. Maybe we're speeding down the highway. Maybe we are, doing something less than legal and we hope we don't get caught this time. But security teams are a little more risk averse than normal. Security teams know what can happen when bad things occur, and they're constantly thinking of all the reasons why we shouldn't be doing the things that we do. There's a reason why your security team probably is called the Department of No. Part of this reason is because the most rewarding way for the security team to not have to deal with risk is to flat out avoid it. In the investing circles, we call this risk averse, which means people are going to attempt to minimize their risk as much as possible. In investing and other financial instruments, this means trying to find the least risky investment that you can find in order to put your money in. Now, of course, when you talk to anyone involved in the financial markets, they'll tell you that if there's no risk, there's no reward either. However, when it comes to IT, performing risky behaviors is generally not a good idea because there is usually very little reward at all, even when you do it the right way. Former presidential candidate Herman Cain had a quote about risk factors. He said that he rated people's risk factor on a scale of 0 to 1. People with a risk factor of 0 would never even dream of going skydiving because of all of the things that could go wrong. People with a risk factor of 1 would jump out of a plane without a parachute and hope that they find one on the way down. Your security team would never even get on the airplane in most cases because they're that risk averse. What could possibly have happened to make your security team that risk averse? Well, a 2018 cybersecurity survey done by spanning.com found that part of the reason why this happens is because users are not exactly the most secure people on the planet. 55% of your users, on average, click on links that they don't recognize. 49% have downloaded some kind of web extension onto a work device. And 1 in 5 will happily share their passwords with you over plain text through an email or possibly even an SMS message. Now, these are all things that we know we've educated users about on a regular basis. Don't share your passwords. Don't download things you don't recognize, especially things like browser helper objects. And do not ever click on links that you don't recognize. And yet, 2018, it's still happening with what we could consider to be the majority of people in an organization. Now, as a security person, when I hear that, my first thought is lock it all down. Take everyone's rights away. Take away every aspect of the risk that you can so that your exposure is minimized, and if something does happen, the attack surface is as small as possible. That's why we have things like least privilege accounts, or the ability to rotate credentials on a regular basis, or finding security tools that will prevent lateral movement inside of an organization. But the truth is that these are all ways that security teams use to minimize the amount of risk that they have to deal with. Now, to us, it's just getting in the way because we're not able to do our jobs. And we're willing to sacrifice a little bit of ease of use in order to be more safe, but we're not willing to sacrifice all of the ease of use that we have in order to be completely safe. And if you talk to every security expert out there, they'll tell you there's no such thing as completely safe. However, by removing as much risk as possible, they can make it as safe as they can so that they don't have to get yelled at when something happens. There has to be some kind of a middle ground here. There has to be some kind of a way for security experts to be a little more forgiving in the risk department and allow us to do our jobs, while we, as users, are aware of what we're doing. Think of it like this. When you go to Vegas, they are legally required to post the odds of winning for any particular casino game by the table. Why? So you know what you're getting yourself into when you sit down. Some games are fairly easy. Poker is a good example. It's a heads-up game. You're betting against the other people at the table. Other games have a much higher chance of winning for the house. Roulette is a perfectly good example. So what do? Well, first and foremost, we have to educate our users. And I know that I sound like a broken record when I say that, but the more education that we have for users, the better off we're all going to be. We can't make everyone a security expert, but we can make people aware of why doing things like clicking on random links in emails and installing browser helper objects is such a bad idea. And the more we educate people, the more nefarious the bad actors get, which actually makes our job a whole lot easier, because the more subtle they have to be, the easier it is to catch them. If it's just a link in an email and I have to click on it to access something, then that's on me. But if it's a drive-by download link that requires certain interactions with the operating system, those are things that I can track, and those are things that I can prevent and shut down. And that can happen transparently from the user. But the user has to know not to do those things in the first place. Education is something we constantly have to do. And most security programs, and indeed most certification programs now, require some kind of continuing education component. I'm not saying you have to send people to class every 6 months to teach them how to avoid phishing emails. But I'm saying that if you constantly remind them that phishing emails exist, they're less likely to get phished. You also have to have clear policies in place, and especially guidelines for remediation. What happens when something goes wrong? This is generally where a lot of people start looking and pointing fingers. That's not the way to make this happen. You have to have a policy in place. If X happens, here's how you fix it for any given security scenario. Never assume that no one is going to get phished. Never assume that a zero-day exploit will never be exploited. Some of them can be exploited within a matter of weeks. Some of them can take years to come to fruition, as we recently saw with the Windows Server DNS attacks. You have to be vigilant, and you have to have a policy in place. You don't have to have a policy for every exception, but you need to have a policy that covers anything you could come up with. You have to have a good baseline of your security environment. This is generally the one where security teams are a little lax, especially if it's a big environment or they're just coming into things. How do you know what a risky behavior is? Well, that's sometimes easy to spot. Someone putting a ladder on top of 2 shopping carts to get 3 extra feet of elevation to change a light bulb is a pretty risky behavior. However, if they are using a slightly taller than average ladder that looks very unstable but is in fact old and sturdy, that's not a risky behavior. And you wouldn't know that unless you've investigated the ladder, tested it, and made sure that it works. Don't assume that a behavior is risky. Likewise, don't assume a behavior is not risky. You need to do your homework. And yeah, that means you're going to be doing a lot of reading and a lot of asking questions of your users. Don't make them justify why they do their jobs. Ask them why they do things the way that they do. Odds are good there's a good reason why. Here's a hard one for you. You have to understand that risk is part of what we do. Even the most secure computers on the planet, the ones that are completely air-gapped and locked inside of, double-credentialed vaults, still have an element of risk. Someone could bring some kind of removable device in there and take data out. There's always something you won't be able to account for. You need to be ready for that. You need to be willing to accept a little bit of risk. Now, I'm not saying you should open all of your computers to the internet with no firewalls and make your passwords password 123, but be willing to accept a small amount of risk and make sure that you document that risk. Think about a financial disclosure that a company is required to file every quarter. They have to put things that are risky to their business. Why? Because it means that they've analyzed, accepted, and accommodated for them. That tends to make investors really happy. Follow the same guidelines. Here are things that could happen. Here's how our database could be breached. Here's how we will respond to that with a clear, consistent policy with remediation. And here's how likely that is to happen. Putting those things into your security plan tends to make people a lot happier. Another thing you have to get into the habit of doing, if you haven't already, is a blame-free post-mortem. When things happen, not if, but when, people are going to want answers. Good people will want answers. Bad people will want to blame someone. Having been a part of several blame-oriented post-mortems in my life, I can tell you it's a whole lot easier to explain what happened when you don't think that someone's going to come point a finger at you. Likewise, if you're someone who is in a management role over a security team, You need to insulate that team from people who are looking to blame. Yes, the executive team loves to point fingers and say, not me. It's easy to point the finger at the security team, and what will end up happening is their policies will become more and more restrictive, and they will become the department of no over and over again to avoid having the finger pointed at them. So let's deconstruct what happened, fix the problems, and if there are coaching or mentoring tasks that need to happen after the fact, those can be handled privately. We don't need to call anyone out in front of the team. And lastly, this is an organizational level thing. You probably have seen recently there have been a lot of cyber attacks. There have been a lot of data breaches. You can go back as far as you want. Target, the infamous POS credit card hack, is probably the watershed moment. But when you look at Target or Equifax or Garmin or any company that has been infected, attacked, destroyed, had their data stolen, one thing shines clear. These companies, more often than not, don't care about their security posture. They issue a half-hearted apology. They take a little bit of a hit in stock price. They offer credit monitoring or some other kind of, forgivable trinket to make people forget. Nobody ever holds their feet to the fire. And in most cases, they come out even stronger than they were in the past. My friend Greg Farrow at the Packet Pushers podcast loves to say that there's no harm in getting hacked because it's probably cheaper to pay for credit monitoring than it was to pay for the equipment that you needed to put in place to stop the hack in the first place. That has to stop. Rules like GDPR and CCPA make it very, very expensive for companies to get hacked and to have data leaked to outside personnel that are not authorized to read it. We need more of that. We need to understand why these hacks happen. Because right now, if the budget for free credit monitoring for all of your users that are affected is half of what it costs to get the right SIEM or other kind of product in place, I can tell you where the budget's going to go. And I can tell you that the CEO is already practicing their half-hearted apology. In essence, security teams are risk averse because users are risky, because policies don't exist, and because there's really no drawback to that little bit of risky behavior. Because if something does slip through, the security team will get blamed and PR will go into full contact mode to ensure that nothing bad happens. We need to flip the script, and we need to look at why we're doing the things that we do to avoid risk. We need to accept that risk will happen. We need to have clear guidelines in place, clear education programs, and honestly, we need to put a little bit of teeth in the laws to make sure that we're being as safe as possible in accepting but not avoiding risk. Perhaps your security team will stop being the department of no and maybe become the department of maybe. Thank you for joining me for this Tomversation. If you would like to listen to more of these episodes, please head over to our website at gestaltit.com. We also have a variety of other content, including our weekly Gestalt IT news rundown, our Checksum series, and other great podcasts. Hope you join me all very soon for another episode of Tomversations, and I look forward to speaking with you again in